This episode of Art, Music, and Technology is brought to you by Recording Magazine. Recording Magazine is a great place to go if you're just getting started in recording, or if you've got a long history of doing it. There's always good information. They are actually carrying a series from me called Studio 101, which is kind of a great way to learn more about the beginner mind part of recording, so hopefully you'll check it out. With that, I hope that you'll enjoy this interview with Gannon Kashiwa. Okay, today I have the great pleasure of getting a chance to talk to somebody who I've met a number of times. He was actually part of a lot of the meetups that I was attending when I was living in the Denver area. His name is Gannon Kashiwa, and he has quite a history in the audio world. We'll talk to him a little bit about his background, and you'll get to hear all the places that he's been. It's some pretty amazing stuff. But with that, rather than me yakking about it, we'll talk to Gannon himself. Hey, Gannon, how's it going?
Great, Darwin. Thanks, and thanks for having me on your show. This is really fun.
Yeah, thank you for doing it, too. This is kind of cool. Recording Magazine is kind of helping set up some of these recording-focused podcasts, and they really wanted to have you be one of the participants, so that works out really well. Why don't we start off by having you describe a little bit about what your current gig is?
All right. Well, my current gig is very fresh, very new. I started in February. I've been an employee at Universal Audio for the last 5 years. And in February, I changed jobs from being technical marketing guru, which was my actual job title on my business cards, to senior product manager. And so as of today, I am one of our handful of product designers and product managers at UA. And on my plate is hardware, specifically our digital hardware. So many people know about the Apollos and the satellites and some of our other PCIe cards and things like that. So that's my bailiwick now. I'm in the driver's seat and working on some incredibly fun new products that, of course, I can't talk about. But I'm also developing new features across the UAD platform for plugins and for things that will run on today's Apollos. So it's a very forward-looking job, and I'm really excited. I'm kind of drinking from the fire hose, if you will, learning how to work in agile development and design products and get things through the pipeline. But man, I couldn't be happier.
Well, that's fantastic. It's interesting. For Recording Magazine, I was just involved in a team effort to do a review on the recent Aero hardware, which was really a nice little piece of work. That was very cool stuff. What exactly is the product manager's job? I mean, are you on the design side? Are you on the marketing side? Or where exactly do you sit in sort of like the world of the corporate run-through?
Right. Great question. In product management at UA, we have a level of person that is called a product designer, and we have sound designers. We have product designers that strictly work on what the design of a certain product is going to be. Then we have product managers, of which I am, and I'm a designer. But I'm also, you would probably consider me a mini CEO of the projects that I'm on. So that means I have to pay attention to the cost, the opportunity costs, the physical costs. How much does it cost us to make something? How many engineers is it going to take us to do something? What's the business case for it? I need to go out and do market research and do competitive analysis and see what other manufacturers are doing to solve problems, and then bring my experience to bear and say, how can UA solve problems in a unique way that advantages us in ways that other companies don't have? So senior product manager, since I have the name senior in front of me because I did this 10 years before this at Avid and Digidesign. That means I have a lot of responsibility making the right business case, making the right decisions for the products, and making sure that we're spending our research and development money in the smartest way we possibly can. And I follow the products all the way from conception to the end of life. So in product management, in the classical term, I manage products from their birth to their death, and I'm responsible for their success in the marketplace.
Sure, that's actually really interesting, because I think that people don't really get that. They understand that there's a huge amount of excitement around the beginning and the birth of a new product, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Absolutely.
the fact of the matter is, products are evolving right up until the day that they aren't available anymore. And all of that requires a lot of hand-holding, but it also means there's almost like two kinds of research that you have to do to stay on top of that. Before it goes out, you have what would be typically called like market research. Mm-hmm. But once it's out there, doesn't that kind of also flip to something that might be maybe more appropriately called like customers research, interacting with the customers, finding out how they're actually using it, finding out how it could improve now that it's in the field, stuff like that?
Oh, absolutely. And sustaining engineering and redevelopment of products is a huge part of being successful in this world. You can do the best you can do to get something out and think through all the scenarios and all the personas, as they're called. Who's going to use this? How are they going to use this? But until it's in people's hands, you really don't have an opportunity to see, how well your calls were thought out. So that's a big part of it, and that's a great connection. And one of the things that led me to this is 5 years of being the technical marketing guru. I sat on the front lines of UA's social media. So I was on forums, I was on Facebook, I was on Gear Sluts, and all the places that people go to do their personal market research. And I developed a bit of a persona out there and made some really great relationships with power users, new users, various people in the market. And bringing that customer perspective and that information back to the product development side of things is, I think, one of the most critical things a company can do. Because when you sell someone a piece of equipment, that's just the beginning of your relationship. You are essentially married, and it's your job, it's my job to make sure that we get through the arguments, that we get through the spats, and you know what I'm saying? It's
right.
To continue the analogy, but you have to listen to people and then respect what they have to say and try to honor what they're asking. So it's a big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that actually, you mentioned Gear Sluts, which is, I think that anybody who's spent any time out there probably cringes a little bit thinking about a job that requires you to spend time there, because I would assume that it could feel pretty brutal sometimes.
Very, very brutal. And just like any company, you make mistakes, and people gang up on you, because it only takes one or two influencers early in a thread, and all of a sudden you've created a monumental problem for everybody, problems that they didn't even know they had. But just because one influencer mentions something, all of a sudden it becomes a really difficult issue for everyone. Right. So managing that, especially in social, because people are unidentifiable. Everybody goes by a handle of some sort or an alias, so you don't know who people are. From doing this and getting to know the audience out there, I'm reasonably sure that a fair percentage of those people are trolls. In other words, people from other companies or people that have a vested interest in doing harm to us. And that's the name of the game these days. People don't know who you are, you don't know who they are, and so everything is fair game. It's a crappy job.
I imagine. So now, in addition to doing the work with UA, you also still maintain kind of a fairly active engineering life. I know that at least you've done mastering for a number of my friends over the years. Are you maintaining that still?
I do. And to me, it's critical, especially now that I'm in product design. It's critical for me to have my hands on the gear every day. And really live it, really push it, and use it in a professional way. So I have a business on the side. I have a wonderful home studio called The TARDIS. I mix, master, I do audio post, I do sound design, and I owned a studio in Denver for many, many years, and I still have clients from the old days, from 30 years ago, that are still ringing my doorbell and asking me to do post work for them. So I have some stuff up there now for YouTube and Chipotle and Canon and Chobani, Adidas, just to name a few.
Wow, that's something. So one of the things I like doing in the podcast is talking to people about kind of their journey to become the person, the artist, or the maker, the inventor, the Imagineer that they are. I'm a little curious about what your travels are, because you've already dropped a couple of good-sized neutron bombs on us here about working with Avid Digi, about owning a studio, about some of this stuff. Why don't we reel back and talk a little bit about the process of you coming up through the world of recording and how you got to where you are now?
Okay, well, I'm old, so this is going to take a while.
Let's not talk about that anymore, okay?
All right. Forget about that. But I thought that I would be a musician from a very young age. I started playing the guitar and the ukulele when I was about 5 years old. I grew up in a skiing family in upstate New York, and I broke my first leg of 3 when I was 5. So I was laid up for a long time, and my older brother had a guitar, and I used to listen to him play it. I thought, I like that. So I started playing the guitar and really just kind of hacking around at it. And then I grew up in a very small town in the Adirondack Mountains, and there were 22 people in my graduating class. Wow. So yeah, so a very small high school, and we did have a really good vocal and instrumental music program, and I was the fill-in guy because I kind of had musical aptitude. So I played everything from the flute to the trumpet to the guitar to the bass to the drums to the tuba, snare drum, the tenor, and all the different, whatever they needed in any of those bands, I would play. Okay. So and then in high school, I started gigging with the instrumental music teacher. So at 15 years old, I started knowing about the real book and going and playing tuxedo gigs at the fancy bars around where I grew up. So that was kind of my interest in music. Got started early. Right about that time, I started taking classical guitar lessons at Syracuse University. My mom was kind enough to drive me the 2 hours each way. I learned from a maestro Spanish guitar teacher there, and that really set the hook. So my degree from college, I went to Middlebury College in Vermont, is in classical guitar performance. And but hidden behind that, in 1980, the director of the music program there, named George Todd, was great friends with a man named John Appleton, who was the creator of an instrument called the synclavier. And that was developed in White River Junction, Vermont, which is about 40 miles away from Middlebury. So we had synclavier number 2 when John Appleton would make his thing, right? He would drive down the road, and he and George would, drink a bottle of scotch together and then whip out whatever was, new in the synclavier. So, they had the first sampler. We had the first FM synthesis. We had, a 16-track sequencer, and all these things were just amazing to me. I couldn't believe the sound that was coming out of this amazing computer that took 15 minutes to boot. It was just cool. We also had a Moog 2600 or an ARP 2600 and a big Moog 9000. So all of these synthesizers were kind of part of my classical experience, and I used to write background music tracks that I would then improvise classical guitar over, and I would put heaps of reverb on and do this atmospheric stuff that was really fun for a 17 and 18-year-old kid.
Right.
So I took a year off during that time, and I went to the Berklee School of Music, learned bass, and then that was my college career. I graduated in 1982, And right after that, I got married, and my wife and I moved to Colorado. I played in bands here. I worked in a sporting goods store, and we started our family. So for several years, I was a part-time guitar, bass player. I did tons of casuals, tons of lessons. And I taught at a music store. I worked in a music store, did the whole thing that the starving musician wanted to do. Right about, this would have been in about 1985 or so, I started getting gigs at a studio here in Denver called Community Creations, and I was a session player, of which that's a dying breed. There aren't that many more of those anymore,
right?
Especially in Denver. So I started playing bass on these different jingle sessions and people's records, and this studio expanded into video, and an engineering chair opened up in one of their small rooms. So I worked for free. That means no money.
Yeah.
Yep, I worked for free for about a year. I was playing gigs at night and then doing this thing during the day, and then finally they said, "All right, well, you're worth it. We'll hire you." So I did that for a number of years. Let's see, that would have been 85 to about 89, and then in 1989, my dear friend and then future partner Paul Vastola and I opened up Rocky Mountain Recorders, which is a still going studio in Denver today. We were definitely pioneers and groundbreakers, and that's when I discovered recording to hard drive and using a computer and doing digital recording. Right about that time, that's when Pro Tools, and actually preceded by Sound Designer, came online. So I bought Pro Tools interfaces, the 442s. First, we started with Sound Designer, but when we finally got to Pro Tools, I had interfaces 14 and 15 of the 442 way back when. Right off the bat, I said, "Wow, this is way different from working on a 24-track and flying in sound effects using a 2-track machine and locking up to video with center track time code on a 2-track, which no one ever does anymore."
Right.
But I started using Pro Tools and almost instantly came upon some bugs that were really, really hard things to solve, things that had been overlooked. And, we expanded our systems out to 16 voices, which was unheard of. Not only did it cost $40,000, but, they were buggy. So I got in touch with a couple of guys at what was then called Digidesign, and I just called them on the phone and I said, "Hey, I got a problem. Who can I talk to?" So I started talking with one of the QA engineers originally, and then he immediately passed me on to one of the senior designers, who was, Mike Rockwell, who's now VP of Dolby. Right about that time, they said, "Man, we need you to work with us." So I became a beta tester for those guys in 1991, and that was right at Pro Tools 1.0. From that time, I worked on pretty much every Pro Tools release until about Pro Tools 10.
Oh my God.
And this is all while I was working, doing my day gig at Rocky Mountain Recorders. I was I was careful, but I used, way pre-released stuff on customers, and I never lost, I will say it proudly, I never lost a piece of data, never lost a session, because I would print it to Pro Tools and then immediately dump it to a 24-track. So,
right.
Safety net, right? And so that went on for several years. We had a fantastic run there at Rocky. And in 1999, Digi said, "You know what? We actually need you to come and work for us full time." So I left Rocky Mountain Recorders. Paul was still running it. And I said, "I'm going to take a 6-month sabbatical." I was hired on as a hardware designer right off the bat, and I was working on a control surface called Pro Control, which was the first motorized fader control surface.
Right.
So I worked on that and then worked on the Huey, and then 6 months went by, and I decided not to go back. And I finally sold my interest in Rocky to Paul in 2004, and I kept working at what became Avid then till about 2008. So just shy of 10 years. But through that time, I did all of the control surfaces. So I started with Pro Control, and then I did the original Control 24. I worked on the 192 series of interfaces and the sync I/O.
Right.
I've then worked on the Command 8. I did the D control, the D command, the surround panner for the D control. So that was quite a run there.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, it's interesting too that so you literally started like in the old Sound Tools days, right? With the very first.
Yep. I had an emulator, so I needed an editor for my emulator.
All right, got it. So my question then for you is, given that you started from kind of like Digi day one, what was the point that you were like, oh, okay, this is going to take over?
That would be probably around Pro Tools 4.2, 4.3, something like that. So 1994-ish. We got off to a rocky start. We had issues with hardware, issues with sync, issues with software stability, and it was still quite a novelty. People were basically, it's been an evolution, and people initially used Pro Tools as just a replacement for their tape deck. Right. So they'd lay a bunch of tracks down, and then they'd bring all those back out I/O and then into a console and mix in the console. Right. And right about that time with Pro Tools 4-ish, we had some new hardware that sounded pretty good. We were going 24-bit. Stuff started to sound really good, and it became feasible. We started to get some more plugins. It started to become feasible to start to mix in the box, as people call it today. Right. And I saw right then, I said, there is no way in heck I'm going back. Honestly, because you could not only edit, you could do arrangements. You could completely take something down and recreate it very quickly and very easily. And it had instant recall. Total recall, not this SSL total recall, but total recall, plugins, audio, mixer, everything. And that reproducibility allowed you for the very first time to put a project away, go do something else for a while, come back to it, go away, put it away, come back. And so it was a mindset change that I think has been the biggest turning point or tipping point for, coming into the digital domain.
Right. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that too, because I think a lot of people, you hear a lot of talk about people saying, "Oh, one of the real downsides of digital is that you can obsess your way into oblivion," right? And that is true. I mean, you can record 500 tracks of the vocalist and then basically comp in syllables if you want. But the one thing, and I grew up through the recording world during that time frame as well, and I think people forget the fact that what digital does do that you couldn't do is give you the chance to walk away. There was no way you could walk away from your analog studio and come back and even be close with all the effect settings, because even if you had automation, you could save that. It didn't do anything for you when it came to all the effects processors and all the line processors and all that stuff, and even for that matter, things like level control and stuff. The whole thing, you ended up kind of like recreating an awful lot of stuff, and you'd get close, but there was always this feeling like, oh, it was more magical before I shut things down. You would build up this fantasy in your head that it was better before I hit the off switch.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. And, even the best automation systems back then gave you, fader levels and mutes, but what about send levels? What about pans? All that stuff. So, you had these multiple hands on the console, and everybody was looking at their check marks. Okay, where's my tick? Right. And I'm going to go here. And it was very choreographed. It was a beautiful thing. I really enjoyed that kind of mixing. But you're right. Each one was a unique performance. Each mix was a unique performance. So, yeah, the automation thing does allow you to become so microscopic We call it slow tools now because that's what it turns you into, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
So, given that you were focused on doing a lot of control surface design, it probably meant that not only did you bring in your experiences in the studio, but you had to spend a lot of time around other people's studios as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. My tenure at Digi was probably one of the most exciting times of my life. I traveled the world, and I went to some of the best studios on the planet and talked to engineers about workflow. We had listening parties. We had mix demonstrations where people would say, I need to solve this problem. And so they would load up a tape or load up or whatever. And, we would talk about what issues and what problems we can possibly solve here. So yeah, it was a tremendous time. So yeah, I feel very blessed to have set foot in some of the best studios in the world.
I remember working on the Pro Control and some of those things, and it was really clear that it was informed a lot from some of the classic consoles. At the time, what was it that you were looking at that represented the state of the art? I mean, did you feel like you were having to compete with SSLs at that point?
Sure. SSL, flying faders, those were the two kind of predominant automation systems that were available at that time. So yeah, the Total Recall, as I mentioned earlier, you're looking at a screen and you had to physically reset the buttons, and then toward the later evolutions of that, they would at least give you the knobs would change color when you were aligned properly.
Right.
But that was one of them. And looking at how we did it, how do you express groups in the digital world? That was one thing. How do you, handle mute groups? How do you handle VCA groups, which we didn't do for a very long time? Yeah, those were the models. And because we were trying to bring in people from that world, there was a very strong design guideline that we needed to make these things feel comfortable to analog engineers. So that was a big driving force behind the design.
Yeah, well, it's funny that you were so involved in the recording world in Denver. I was doing recording stuff in the Dallas area, and my partner in the recording studio actually got to know some people in the recording world over in Denver, and we actually ended up kind of like spending time with folks out there. Denver was sort of like the regional center for that kind of near West. What kind of work were you seeing the recording studio do? I mean, I have to admit that those kind of like the great days of big studios, there's still a time there that I romanticize in my head, because there was so much activity around studios. Things were really hopping, right?
Mm-hmm. You know it. Well, both Paul and I are musicians, so we went into Rocky Mountain Recorders with the eye that we wanted to make hip, cool, luxurious studios. We wanted state of the art. We wanted, the best we could possibly afford to put together. We built it ourselves with our bare hands, and a bunch of other really dedicated people that helped us launch that place. But the main focus of our work was commercial work, because that was the heyday of when you could bring in an advertising agency and charge them a package price for some music, for some audio post, and make a pretty handsome dollar there. Another piece of technology that sort of came along a few years after we opened was called the land patch, and some people know it by ISDN. But basically, they're high-speed digital phone lines, and you put a really expensive box on one end in a sending studio and a really expensive box in the receiving studio, and you basically have a 20 to 20K recording link in real time.
Right.
So Denver being isolated and in the near West as it is, we had a talent pool for people doing voiceovers and actors and things like that. But it wasn't L.A., it wasn't New York, it wasn't London, it wasn't any of the major centers. And so what the land patch did is bring those worlds closer to us. And that was something that really set us apart from anybody else, because we had 3 of those boxes. And back then, when you were doing a LAN patch session all locked up to video with music playing in the background, and all that was a $575 an hour studio.
Holy
so
shit. Wow.
Yeah, right. And so that's how you build a business. You can't build a business on $35 an hour cutting drum tracks. So, we did cut a lot of music, and we used a lot of studio musicians. We played ourselves. We actually had a record label for a few years called Baby Jane Records, and that was really fun. And I learned how not to do a record label.
It's the first rule of thumb of running a record label is learning how not to run one, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, we were trying to do the whole thing because the theory was we had the studio, we had the chops, we could make records, and I bought a CD replicator way back. This is again in the late '90s. Spent $15,000 on a CD replicator, and so we cut the stuff. We would farm out the artwork. We would replicate the CDs, print them, and sell them, and the artists would be satisfied. They would start to see money long before the studio bill was paid. Right. So trying not to be evil about it, but you just again, a tough lesson there is you can't make money doing it that way.
Right.
You can't even support yourself.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's funny because you talk about like doing commercial gigs and stuff like that. And I remember the studio we were in, we would do these like package gigs for like banks, You'd make like a generic bank advertisement set, and then it would be a package that would be sold, right? All that kind of stuff doesn't really exist anymore, or at least not in that way.
Yeah, it really doesn't. The way things are produced now, agencies themselves have become edit houses. So it's not uncommon for most agencies to have, either a Final Cut Pro system or a Media Composer system, and they're doing audio post up to a certain point. Yep. So they don't need to go out for a lot of things. So that model has shifted dramatically.
So you worked at Digi until 2008. Why did you end up leaving Digi?
I burned out. This is one of the things that was difficult for me. I have lived in Denver my whole life, or my whole adult life, and I commuted to San Francisco for those 10 years. Oof. So I spent a lot of time on the road, a lot of time away from my family. I have 3 boys, and I missed a lot of their growing up, and that wasn't fun. And then the political atmosphere at the company really started to change. And it stopped being as gratifying as I wanted it to be. As I think if I'm doing all the sacrifice and really committing a huge part of my personal life, this better be fun. So it stopped being fun, and I left them right after we shipped the D-Control and the surround panner for D-Control, and that would have been Pro Tools 7.4.
Okay. And what did you do after that?
After that, I went to work at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science.
That's when that happened. It's funny because actually, in terms of like tracking your name, I didn't really know of you related to Digi, but I heard about you in relationship to the museum.
Ah, okay. Yep. Then, I did that. For one, it's less than a mile from my house. And also, a good friend of mine was the vice president of technology there, and they were embarking on some really ambitious plans and needed some significant help. This was they were underway developing the health exhibit there, Expedition Health, and they were redoing the Space Odyssey exhibition, redoing the planetarium, upgrading the IMAX theater to an IMAX 3D. So there were a lot of really deep infrastructural projects going on at the same time. Oh, and then we also worked on the new expansion, the Morgridge Family Science Center. So I came in and I wrote the technology plan for Expedition Health and finished that project, got it up off the ground. There's about 60 computers that run that thing, all in a network, all accumulating and contributing to a common database, and it's a really fantastic exhibit. Plus, it has a 5.1 surround theater, and I got to work on that and do the content for the theater and the performance stages. And basically, I brought automation and high definition audio and video, networked audio and video throughout the whole museum, and gave them hopefully a platform that will stand growth for about 50 years is what the plan is. So we'll see let's see if AVBV is around in 50 years, right? Because that's what I stuck us into.
Interesting. So, are you still involved with them?
I am. I consult. I just actually got a call today. They're upgrading the Expedition Health Theater. They're going to change the movie that's in there, and I got a call and they said, "Hey, can you help us out, re-edit this and help us mix it?" So I go over and help them tune spaces when there's new temporary exhibits going on in the upstairs gallery. I put in a big networked system in there from Audia. And if you guys anybody listening that is doing installed sound, that's the bomb. The Audia systems are fantastic.
You know, I think a lot of people who play around in the sound world kind of look at, or they go to a museum and they see the kind of exhibits that are in a museum, and they imagine that has to be a really fun, really exciting place to work. What was your experience that?
Oh, very much so. I really enjoyed the collaborative part of that because there are educators. A lot of people don't know, and I think DMNS is somewhat of a unique place because there is a huge visitor programs department, and these are people that really concentrate on what's the experience going to be. And then they work with educators. There's a large outreach division that goes to schools and really educates young minds in science and technology. Then there's the exhibits department. Those are the people that actually, take care of the 110 dioramas and bring in the new temporary exhibits and stuff. So there are some tremendously talented and passionate people there. And, to help them realize their vision and bring to the table, hey, let's do this with surround sound, or let's do this with HD, and we can really make the smoke and mirrors thing a lot more real than a slideshow or what it was before I got there. And so I really enjoyed that. It was quite a dream job.
Well, and I also think that for a lot of people, working in that scenario is going to probably give you the biggest potential audience that your work could ever experience, because it's not going to be uncommon if you do something in a high volume museum like that for your work to get in front of 1 million people.
Exactly. 1.3 million anniversary visits. And that's, they have more memberships than any museum in the country. It's the fourth largest science museum in the country. I didn't realize that until I was there. Wow. By traffic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in your work there, what is the oddest thing that you had to do? What's the weirdest thing that they asked you to do?
That's a tough question. What would be odd? I don't know. Maybe putting sound in bathrooms. What's
You actually had to do sound design for bathrooms, or you mean the sound install?
Sound install in the bathrooms, but I wanted to also do, I wanted immersive experiences that took you in different places. So when we built the new Mortgage Family edition, oh man, we did great sound, and I spent more money and raised more eyebrows at that than you can shake a stick at. So next time you go into the Mortgage Family edition and look at the big microtiles wall there, and then hopefully they'll have some sort of a music program, because I put in a 10,000 watt PA system that services that video wall, and connected to that because we had the biamp system. I could pipe ancillary sounds into the bathroom. So we did.
For the truly immersive experience. That's hilarious. That's fantastic. So now you started working with UA, and we already kind of talked about some of the stressors involved in doing social media work with the company. I'm curious though, the social media work wouldn't have been just, putting out social media fires, but it also had to probably be also kind of an on-the-fly support guy, but also doing some of that customer research as part of that too, right?
Yeah, exactly. And my gig being the technical marketing guru was, they made that job for me. I had friends, I have lots of friends there, and they needed some help. But really, that job was, I sort of spanned marketing and product management and engineering and customer service. So I sort of sat in between all of those and gathered information and passed it to the right places, so that it was more than just handling and gathering. I was fixing stuff too. So it was a very cool thing.
Well, one of the things that I find interesting about Universal Audio is that unlike a lot of sort of .com era audio companies, there are people from kind of throughout the ages of recording that are deeply embedded in that company. I mean, I know people from all, that I've gotten to know over my career, from all different aspects of the music and recording communities, ended up finding places in UA because they seem to like focus on finding people with great depth of knowledge, right?
That's so true. And Bill Putnam is still the man.
Right.
He is still driving, and he's passionate. He's involved in our new developments. He's involved with keeping the wheels on the wagon. And you're right. He seeks people that have the fire. So it's kind of a self-selecting crew. It's amazing that it's not a publicly held company.
Right.
It still, it still feels like a startup. Ideas can come from anywhere. So the meritocracy thing is still very real and very alive. And that's one of the things that attracts, I think, people who are perhaps a little less willing to just sort of toe the line. You want to be heard. You want to be able to say anything that you think is relevant and important and have it heard. And I think UA is really about that.
I mean, in a way, that's kind of like built into their DNA, because if you kind of look at the origins of the company and the origins of some of that engineering, a lot of it kind of flew in the face of common, the common recording beliefs of the time.
That's right. And, when Bill started UA or relaunched it, his dad started the company, the analog side, way back when in 1958. But when Bill and Jim relaunched it in 1999, actually, Bill started doing this other company called Kind of Loud a couple of years before that, and I beta tested his stuff. So very, very much in the early surround days, before there were surround buses and Pro Tools, he hijacked, a bunch of buses and let you mix in surround, gave you a little panner called Surround Pan Pro. So that's when I met him. I met him, God, that's 20 years ago, right?
Wow.
So when they relaunched UA, the notion was we can take this digital stuff and make it sound analog and really give it an analog feel. And so Dave Berners came along, and these guys made it up. So how do you model stuff? I don't know, but let's figure it out. And they did it. And even their earliest plugins, the first LA2A, the first 1176, were head and shoulders above anything else that anybody else had done. So that's really the kind of the seed that's still alive there and growing all of us.
So being a guy that's inside the building, I always like looking for people's favorites, right? So you have access to everything. You have access to all the plugins you want and all the hardware you want. What is your dream setup? And especially among the plugins, what's the thing that shows up in every session?
Preamp wise, I'll start at the top of the channel. I love the 610. I love the 610B.
Me too.
It's so warm and gentle and sounds good on everything. And the older I get, I use less and less EQ, less and less compression. I'm much more apt to change the microphone choice. Gee, what about that? What about moving the microphone? I try to get it right from the top of the channel, and I think the 610 is amazing. We just released another Mark II version of the Helios Type 69, which is also an incredible mic preamp and EQ. I love the API Vision Channel Strip. I've always enjoyed API consoles, and their EQs are just fantastic. So those are I like the top of the channel stuff there. For reverbs, I think the most enchanting is by far the BX20. I love what it does. The Lexicon, you can't go wrong with a Lexicon. You can't go wrong with a EMT 140. All those are great, but when you want that vibe and you've got space and you're not playing too many notes, the BX20 is definitely the one to go to. Let's see. What do I like in some of the other places? Dynamics, oh gosh, there's so many. I still go for the LA2A and the 1176 almost first.
Is that because you're really familiar? I mean, I noticed for myself, I always jump to 1176 because I know from back in the hardware days, I know it so well that I can like make settings without having to think too much.
Sure, and it's the sound. I'm used to the sound.
Right.
It does produce a certain sound. We've got probably the best model of the distressor now. So I find myself, if I really want poppy drums, I'll go for the distressor. The Fairchild, that 670 is another amazingly vibey piece. So I use that quite a bit. Believe it or not, one of our oldest ones is the LA3A. I still go for the LA3A. I love it.
Interesting.
So yeah, the older things are cool too. What else do I go for? The Shadow Hills definitely has a place in there. The mastering compressor is cool. The Summit Audio, the TLA 100, it's almost an LA3A, but it's really cool. Try that on your record path because hit it with 3 to 5 dB of compression. It's invisible and it's just it's a beautiful compressor. So.
Do you find yourself using different tooling for mastering than you do for recording? Or is it that those are your main tools for work, however it expresses itself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I tend to I want to listen to the music that we're mastering first and then think about, what's appropriate to it. Like, if I listen to Mark Mosher's stuff, I'm not going to try to color that at all, really. What I'm looking for in his stuff is just protecting the speakers and seeing if I can get his level to be competitive and maybe widen it a little bit. But he brings such a great palette to it that there isn't a lot of shaping that needs to be done. So in his stuff, I'll use some of the cleaner things. Like I'll use the Oxford limiter. I'll use the massive passive EQ or things like that. The Elysia stuff is super clean. And, although here I'm going to go back on what I just said, I use the Pultec EQP1A, one of the oldest things we have, because it's got that beautiful 30 hertz thing
again, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing makes it glow like that.
Right.
So
interesting. Yeah. So, Gannon, unfortunately, our time is already up and kind of then some. But before I let you go, it would be wrong of me to let you off the line without at least getting some sense of what you think the future looks like, right? Because you're, again, in kind of an interesting seat at the table. And so while I know you can't tell me about specific problems, what is your sense of the general direction of the technology of recording?
Well, definitely our computer-based systems are here to stay. That's a given. I think, UA's approach with DSP is unique in the industry, and I still feel very strongly that a real-time system is going to be with us for at least several years, maybe 10 years even, maybe longer, because of the fixed low latency, the predictable real-time performance. So I think you're going to see low latency interfaces from everybody else. You're going to continue to see integrated interfaces with DSP from UA. I think we are hitting some new levels of accuracy in how we model. And so I think you're going to see more and more incredible emulations. We'll probably go back and do more because we know so much more now than we did 15 years ago. And so I think we're going to see more attention on the analog front end and try to recapture people's imagination as they hear things. I think one of the things that the pendulum has swung far to the right when people just want a squeaky clean antiseptic recording. I mean, how fun is that to listen to? It's not. And so I think there's a wonderful place for us to inspire people while they're recording, to give them sounds in real time. So that's where I think at least our segment of the market is going to go. We're going to try to inspire people with sound.
Well, Gannon, I want to thank you again so much for taking the time and talking to us.
My pleasure, sir. Thank you.
And we'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Bye. Many thanks to Gannon for having the discussion. It's really interesting to hear about kind of the early days of digital recording, and especially the world of Digidesign / Avid's Pro Tools. You can imagine what a wild world that must have seemed like, especially for a guy who was used to doing 3-code or 3-track recordings for sync and synchronized 24 tracks. That was pretty heady stuff. Thank you all for listening. The numbers for the podcast have been great. It's been fantastic. I also want to thank everybody who has gone out and supported me on Bandcamp. It's darwingross.bandcamp.com. I've had some really nice messages from people there, as well as some nice sales. It was really interesting and fun and kind of heartwarming to have some people buy my music. It's a chance to hear some of what I've done. I'm putting up some archival stuff there. If you could check it out, I'd appreciate it. Also, one other thing, we started streaming these out to YouTube, and YouTube has some special opportunities for us if we get a number of subscribers. So if you have a chance, jump over to YouTube, find one of the podcasts, subscribe to our feed, and that'll just help us out in the future. I really appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to let you go. Have a great one, and I'll see you next week. Bye.